Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint of self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach to women, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. You've probably heard the saying, control is an illusion, and for all points and purposes, it absolutely is. It's also one of the greatest paradoxes we experience in life. We are to be in control, but try not to control every situation, while finding a sense of control to keep ourselves safe. It's no wonder we screw this up and use control in many ways that often negatively impact us. That's why you and I are taking a one-on-one deep dive into control. We'll take a journey into the 3 root causes of control, and we'll talk about repairing our relationship with specific outcomes, no matter what situation we may be facing. By the end of the conversation, I hope you'll have a new understanding of why the art of surrendering is so damn important. So grab your pen and your piece of paper. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. Okay, control. Everyone take a big, long, deep breath right now because you and I are about to have a conversation. Control is really an interesting thing. As you just heard me say, it is one of the biggest illusions, one of the biggest paradoxes of our lives. We are to be in control of ourselves, but also try not to control everything in our lives. And we're supposed to go with the flow. And yet, if we don't feel safe, going with the flow feels like a lack of control. It's an impossibility. It's an impossible circle. We're supposed to also create control of the self, but not be a perfectionist about it. I have my hand up. It's an issue for me a lot of times too. We're also supposed to not have any rigidity in our lives. We're not supposed to be controlled by anything. No person, no place, no event, no thing, good or bad, no financials, emotions. You get it, your thoughts, all of it. And yet, even the good things have a way of controlling us. To make matters worse, or even maybe just a little bit more interesting, I want you to think about your life. When things are going well, what happens? We don't feel the need to control. We don't feel the need to control anything. We have a way of simply relaxing and allowing us to really feel like things are okay. So we don't have to try. We don't have to try so hard. We don't have to try to make things happen. We just are. Which is also something I was really terrible at, at least before my healing journey in 2016. But, it was the allowing part that always got me. And after so many sessions with so many people, that is generally what gets most people too. And maybe you're like me and like them, and you struggle with this as well. And really, we struggle with these shades of control, the varying levels. And it gets to a point where we don't know where we're supposed to stand, right? Like, I can do this, but I'm not supposed to do that. And if I do too much of that, it's a problem. And I don't know where I'm supposed to go. What the hell am I supposed to do? And the biggest answer to that question is, if you know you struggle with trying to control everything in your life, you try to control your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings, the environment, people, relationships, all the things, the very first thing that we have to do is become acquainted with control. We have to explore our relationship with it. We have to look at how it impacts us and how we need to change the patterns. And I want you to hang on to that word pattern for just a bit. We're going to be talking about it in depth in just a few moments, and it's going to come up multiple times. Pattern, okay? Lock that in. And as a therapist, again, who sits with people 5 days a week, there are a few things I see over and over again that you really need to know about control. And so let me hand those over to you. Normally, we talk about definitions when we are together. And really, it's interesting because control, like every emotion that you have, has a different definition for you than it does for me. So that's part of this getting acquainted with it. What does control mean to you? But let's talk about some of the things that I see a lot. Control often steps into our lives a lot of times because we have this notion, this thought that if we don't have control, we won't know what will happen. And that comes down to one of life's biggest functions. You hear me talk about it all the time, and that's safety. If we don't feel safe, whether that is physical safety or mental, emotional, financial, those 5 masters I talk about, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, and financial safety, even connecting with the soul itself, we try to create safety through our actions and our reactions and even our environment. So we allow control to come in. We use control as the mechanism, the coping mechanism, to try to forecast what we may experience. And there's something below that we have to talk about too. If we don't feel safe, you're going to experience one emotion that will own you and take you down faster than almost just about anything else, and that's fear. Now, please understand, like everything in your life, there are levels of fear. And so if you're shaking your head thinking, I don't control things because I have fear, I want you to get into that notion that fear has different levels. You don't have to be in high levels of fear for fear to be active. And fear is tricky, right? Because sometimes it's present and we don't even know that it's present. And if you haven't done the work to understand what emotions mean to you, what fear and control and upset and anger and happiness and neutrality, all of these things mean, you may be naming what you're feeling something other than what it actually is. But below this sense of safety, if it is not there, fear is present. So that's one of the biggest things I really want you to lock into, key into the fact that if I don't feel safe, there is an element of fear involved. What will happen? The next thing that I see is the fact that control is often the result of being attached to an outcome. This is where we believe something needs to happen for us to feel our best or to be our best. And when we trust that we're okay, no matter how a situation may unfold, we don't have to try to micromanage everything, even ourselves, but especially others and feelings and experiences. We're open to possibility to, be here right now, back to that safety element of all of this. And it goes back to the thought that when life is going well, I don't feel like I have to control. Because when we are in that space, guess what we're also not in? We're not in anxiety. We're not in stress. Because anxiety and stress, but especially anxiety, is about forecasting and trying to create 1,000 scenarios of something so we're prepared. And we have a playbook in our head, an instruction manual of I'll say this and then I'm going to say that. And if I say this and I do this, then that will actually show this. Instead, we just show up and we allow those thousands of scenarios to play out. And we don't have to try to make it work for us. We can even go a step further and say, if we try to control the negatives become the focus, and therefore they begin to control us. It's a nasty cycle, right? It's a horrible cycle. It's a space that actually will own us time and time again. I speak from experience, both doing it and watching people do it all day, every day. And the third biggest thing is one of the biggest aha moments for most people, so I hope it is for you. The energy of surrendering to a moment takes you the same amount of energy and time as it takes to control, and yet the energy of surrendering accomplishes so much more for you. Let that sink in. It takes the same amount of energy to surrender to a moment as it does to try to control a moment. One is a positive outcome, and one is often a negative outcome. We're going to talk about surrendering in just a moment. I'm going to change the definition for you. I'm going to give you a new perspective of it. But let that sink in. Same amount of energy, different outcomes. Operating from a place of control can often take us into survival mode. It can help you create these blind spots in your thinking and your actions, and that takes you deeper into anxiety. We can even have physical symptoms to match, everything from checking out to this adrenaline that's pumping through your veins, while cortisol floods your system and you get into that fatigue level that hits you mind, body, and spirit. We've all been there. We've all done it. And often when we talk about it, I will say, what were you controlling in your life? What was happening that you felt like you had a lack of safety? What was happening that you felt like you had no control? And that will stop people so quickly. Well, I didn't realize that was the problem, but you're right, I didn't feel safe. You're right, I was trying to control. When we get here, when we get to that space, we're trying to formulate and ruminate and try to get out. We don't understand what we want. We don't understand what we need. We don't have an understanding of ourselves, let alone present moment awareness. And we really get into this space that does not work for us. I want you to think about that. Like, seriously, put your thinking cap on right now and think about how many times has that happened to you? How many times have you been running at something thinking, I have to fix this, and yet I'm so damn exhausted I can't even think straight. I know I can't even count. I've done it so many times. And yet we have to look at the control. If you listened to the episode where Dr. Jane and I were giving our best practices and our best tools, I talked about this switch of taking I feel, we say that so often, I feel this, I feel that, and really removing the word feel and putting control in its place. I control my emotions. Is that good or is it bad? I control the situation, good or bad? I feel angry. I control anger. What's working for you? You see, when we get into that space where we recognize control and we recognize that relationship we have with it, we can actually move into surrender mode. Again, we're going to talk more about surrender, but we know what we need in surrender. You know how you feel. You at least have the ability to check in. You have that available to you. Without it, forget it. You cannot see the bigger picture. And the biggest irony of it all, and here's another aha, is the less you control, the more control you have. I want you to think about it. I see this a lot with women that come in that are having difficulty in dating. And they'll talk about how hard it is to go on these dates and how they want this, and this kind of checklist of things. And they'll talk about, well, I want this to happen and I need that to happen. And in order for me to go on that third or fifth date or let them come home or whatever it is, I'm going to need this. And we talk about the difference between expectation, needy, needs met, and control. What am I really trying to do? If I'm unwilling to be present, what happens? So the less that they try to control, the more control that they have. We see it so often in everything we do. If you think about yesterday, you probably see it, right? When I'm trying to control how fast I get someplace and the traffic is awful, do I have control? No. And the less that I try to stress about it, the more relaxed I am, and the ability to get there faster is easier, right? The more I let go, the better it is. So what causes this need for control? And really, what does controlling really look like at the most basic level? Because that's what we're here for. And I have to say, because I always have to say it, this isn't a way to self-diagnose, so I don't want you doing that. But there are many reasons why, so many reasons why we try to control everything. So I want you to bear in mind, these are just a few that I'm mentioning, okay? There are many more reasons, but these are some of the top ones that I see over and over again. And again, it all comes back to the lack of safety. But control comes from, first, trauma, especially childhood trauma. And remember, trauma doesn't have to be some big, massive event. It can be something extremely small, but it's something that you connected to in a way that didn't work for you. And therefore, it created a pattern in your brain. There's that word again, pattern, that hasn't served you. Okay. So trauma, whatever the definition is, whatever it looks like for you, it's the number one thing that causes us to control because of the lack of safety. The other thing I see is abusive relationships. And it doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is, whether it is a family, a parent, a spouse, a loved one, doesn't matter. Any kind of abusive relationship causes us to want to control the relationships after it. We never want to experience those feelings again. And so we put up these mechanisms, these walls, in hopes of creating safety. And yet it doesn't. It causes us to create this false sense of control and push everyone away. There's also fear of abandonment. There's fear of never being good enough. There's growing up in a household where you never had a voice, where you were never seen. There's anxiety disorders. People with anxiety really struggle, and they need to feel control in order to create as much peace as possible. While on the outside, they can look like they're control freaks or that they're narcissists or whatever label we want to throw on them. We'll talk about that in a second. Really, if we look at the human and we look at the action, we can say, wow, there's fear. Wow, there's the lack of safety. Wow, that person is simply in survival mode. And that person does not feel like they have any kind of control in their life. And so they're creating this false sense of it. Creating structure and order is a great way to relieve anxiety. And most people who have anxiety try to do that by creating those walls. We're going to talk about the why in just a minute, getting into that relationship part. But think about it this way. If we have anxiety, if we're forecasting, if we're trying to control, this is our way of creating predictability and feeling safe. When we have predictability, what happens? Our stress is lower. We're creating better environments for ourselves and for those around us. We know that we're safe and fear is not present. And speaking of fear, the fear of failure is a massive reason why we control. Remember, I said fear is below control. Fear of failure has so many different levels too. That's something we don't talk about enough. It can be a nervous undertone, and it can be a crippling feeling that causes you to try to control every little detail. It's even in OCD for a lot of people. It can come from so many various places, from our mental, our physical, our emotional, and that too creates symptoms in our body. A fear of failure, this needing to be perfect or perfectionism, they're really closely related. That's a whole other conversation. We'll have one, I promise. We need to have that conversation, but I want you to remember fear, lack of safety. Fear of failing, lack of safety. What do we normally do? We try not to do it because that too is a sense of control. When I'm not doing something, I'm controlling. When I am doing something, I'm trying to not control. Again, we go into that paradox. And then, of course, there's the lack of trust. If a person lacks trust, they are going to try to control everything around them and within them. I hear this a lot, and then people toss those labels that we were just talking about. Oh, you're always trying to control me, or they always try to control what we do. They're narcissists. They're gaslighting me. And maybe that's true, but I want you to hear me for just a moment. Sometimes it's because they don't know any better, because they are literally trying to fight for control. They are literally fighting the fear within them. It's not always that somebody's malice or they have bad intentions. And sometimes they just need to control what's happening so that they soothe that fight or flight response that's happening within them. That doesn't mean that it's a positive. It just means that's what's working for them at the time. And that's why we have to change the relationship. If you lack trust, then needing control is going to always feel better when you have it. And of course, that does what? It gives you a greater sense of safety. Lack manifests into control, internally and externally, abundance, goodness, being able to be happy, present, surrendering, gives us what? The ability to relax into our environment, into ourselves. I also see this when we are big into controlling, when we have a lack of safety, we generally have a lower self-esteem. Of course, you probably know that self-esteem means that you don't think very kindly about yourself or very highly of yourself. It's really that harsh inner critic fueling your decisions and your feelings. And if you have a low self-esteem, this false sense of confidence is found in control. I'm going to say that again. Confidence, a false sense of it, is found in control when we have a lower self-esteem. I see this most in women who are in top leadership roles. You know, the CEOs, the CFOs, the entrepreneurs, these women who are kick-ass at their jobs and their lives. And yet that control factor is so high that there's fear so deep in everything that they do that they really spin. They spin in their emotions. They spin in their thought patterns. They look at their behavior and think, why the hell is life not working for me? On paper, it should be brilliant, but off paper, it is a blank mess, right? So I want you to think about that too, is the higher performing you are, the more roles that you have, the more things that you do, control may actually be a greater factor for you. You just may not recognize it. Again, there's so much more to safety and control, but we're going to stop there and talk about some of the actions, the behaviors, and even the feelings of what it looks like when we're trying to control, because that's necessary too. And then we're going to talk about how we change the relationship. But it probably goes without saying that when a person tries to control everything, it literally touches every aspect of their lives. In all of those 5 masters I've mentioned before, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and financially. That can look like us trying to control our finances in a negative way, having too much control, or not having safety and control, and so just throwing caution to the wind, because sometimes negative control is the same as positive control, right? And it could look like physically and mentally stepping into abusive relationships. It can be micromanaging plans and having emotional reactions and disruptions when things don't go their way. I know so many people that are like this in my personal life. They have control issues. They don't even realize it. They never feel safe. They never feel connected. They never give themselves permission to step out of a moment, ever. And so what they'll try to do is they try to micromanage an event, a moment, an experience with somebody. And when that other person has something to say about it, they don't know what to do with their feelings because they already didn't feel safe. And so there's this big emotional explosion and everybody's like, what the hell's wrong with you? What's wrong with them? Are you having a bad day? Something going on? And we haven't stopped to say, you know what? I actually am having an emotional reaction to this because I didn't feel safe in this moment. And I felt like I should try to control the outcome of this moment because that was going to make me feel safe. And that didn't work. So I'm really confused. We blame other people. You did this. You did that. You made me feel this way. When it really comes down to the fact that I didn't feel safe. Can you imagine how many things would change if you just stopped and recognized just that factor alone? It's huge. And I want you to think about this. Control issues can manifest into issues of self-control as well. This can look like exerting yourself too much. It looks like controlling the environment. It looks different for everybody, but one of the biggest things that I see when I don't feel safe and I don't feel good and I don't have a self-esteem that's worth a damn and there's a complete lack of safety, there's often a disordered, unhealthy pattern with eating. There's compulsive exercise routines. There's substance abuse. There's excess in everything. And remember, too much of something isn't always good either. Controlling behavior even includes anything that we may seek to limit or really eliminate, as long as it takes the risk and uncertainty out. If I do this, it will help me. Think about that time where you had a really rough day at work or a really rough day just in life. And the first thing you think is, I can't wait to have a glass of wine. That doesn't mean you're an alcoholic. It just means I'm trying to control how I feel by numbing it out and giving myself a sense of rebalancing, and that will provide safety. We do these things because we think it's going to eliminate the uncertainty, eliminate the risk, give us a sense of safety, give us a sense of control, and it doesn't. It doesn't change anything. It actually sets us on a pattern of doing these things over and over and over again, thus creating more control, but it's really a lack of control. It's really confusing, isn't it? The desire is really to be able to control our surroundings and our circumstances. And listen, it is ingrained into our consciousness. I want you to know that. Again, if your brain is always looking for safety, and that's the brain's number one job, control and safety is ingrained in there too. But think about it. The more you know about your environment, the more you know about the world around you, the safer you feel. And on the other hand, the less you know, the more scared you feel. It's walking down a really dark hallway that you've never been before, and it's that eerie feeling. What is that? That's fear. It's this lack of safety. It's the need to control the moment, but you don't have the tools to do it. I'm going to say this one last time, and then I swear I'll get off of it. But I'm trying to drive the point home. The need for control is rooted in fear, specifically the fear that something bad outside of our control may happen, the uncertainty. So if you can understand that, and you know you don't want to live a life of fear, you can release the control. Is it that simple? No, it's not, but we're going to talk about how in just a second. I mentioned the word patterns a few times in all of that conversation, so let's talk about that now. Your brain, we just talked about its need for safety, and I want you to think about how is safety achieved. Your brain is built and operated through patterns. If we know a lot about our world, we feel safe. You just heard me say that. If we don't know what's in the dark hallway, we don't feel safe. We don't have a pattern for it, okay? We don't have a habit in our thinking for it. We have to experience things. And when we experience things, we connect to those moments. We emotionally connect. And that's how patterns are formed. What is a habit? What is a pattern? They're the same thing. I want you to think about how this works. If you're a regular listener here, you've often heard me talk about the brain being like a computer. And so let's use that analogy again, right? So the brain is built on all of these instructions, these patterns. Those instructions tell us how we should show up: good, bad, controlling, surrender, safety, lack, permission. These are the things that get us into that space of reaction, right? And so the brain looks for the pattern. It looks for, what does this mean? If we look at the moment, if we assess the event, the feelings, and we pull out everything that is occurring, we really go to the computer and say, what is the pattern for this? Is it safe? Is it not? Do I need to control? I want you to think about it in a very visual way too. If I get in my car and I head out on a mountain road and I accelerate so quickly going around a blind corner, what could happen? Could I lose control of that car? Could my car slide off the side of the mountain? And if that happened, one, let's hope I made it. But if that happened, what would my brain extract from the moment? It would say speeding on mountainous roads is going to cause me harm. What would I do the next time I was on a mountain road? I would probably control my speed, right? The brain works in patterns. If I go around this corner and I slide off, trouble. You have to control the moment by controlling the speed. I want you to understand this is actually a good part of control. In all the things that we're talking about thus far, it feels like control is a bad thing. We want to use control in many ways because, again, control is safety. So I want you to think about there is good control and bad control. Good control. I don't need to say that. I don't need to think that. I don't need to be involved in that experience. It's not serving me. That's good control. I need to micromanage this moment because no one can do it like I can. Bad control. What is the pattern? And I want you to think about this. If we look at the pattern, what is really happening? The brain is saying, I'm getting down to just the facts. I did this thing. I got a consequence, although I love the word feedback more than consequence. I got feedback from my action. The next time I do this, I will do X, Y, and Z. This is a pattern. The feedback from the experience becomes the pattern, and that's our response as to whether surrendering or controlling. This is how safety is built for all of us. So how do we get into a new pattern? How can we change the pattern? How can we redefine safety? We have to look at the relationship with control, how it's impacting us, and come up with our own personal definition of safety. So what is it? What is your definition of safety? What does it mean to you? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How would you really pinpoint safety? And it's here that sometimes we have to force ourselves to stop. Sometimes we have to say, no, this isn't working for me. It's not really going to help me in the long run. What is? What would help me in the long run? And the answer to that is surrendering. So what does surrendering mean? Because I want you to really pay attention to what I'm saying here, because a lot of times we have very different definitions of surrendering. And what I mean here is to literally stop fighting. Stop fighting yourself. Stop fighting your emotions. Stop fighting all the things. Stop resisting. Stop pushing. Stop trying to control everything. Surrender is acceptance. It's faith that you can go around that mountain corner and not slide down the mountain. It's knowing I can show up blindly, not knowing how this is going to happen, not knowing what will roll downhill without the instruction manual and still be okay. When I spoke about surrendering in the past, it often comes down to being still, about creating inaction. But here we're talking about a place of actively deciding what we need. Surrendering allows us to change the thought process, the thinking, right? Because humans are creatures of habit, a pattern, again, with the brain. They're so ingrained in our behaviors. So let's talk about how we get into that surrender. Let's talk about how we get into the subconscious mind and release the pattern. And the first part of all of that is we have to embrace the fact that they're there. We have to give ourselves permission to know safety is something that I need. Safety is something that I want. It's sometimes a lack of it. Sometimes I operate in fear, and we focus on those beliefs and those thoughts. If we want to let go of control and surrender is the only way to do it, we have to look at what produces the best results. As I mentioned, looking for patterns is how we get into changing the relationship with control. So we have to break it down. We have to break it down to the ins and the outs, the hows and the whys. So grab that piece of paper again, hit the pause button right now on your device and really take a screenshot of the timestamp, or head over to the show notes later so that you can look at it. But ask yourself some very qualifying self-discovery questions. You've probably heard me talk about self-discovery questions. They're so necessary when we're breaking anything down. So here are your questions. 1, where does my need for control come from? Try to pinpoint where it started. What happened? Now, I want you to know this because it's super important and it's something that a lot of people get really frustrated with. I want you to understand that sometimes we don't know the why. Sometimes we can't extract the pattern. Sometimes we have no idea why this shows up or why we do it. And if you don't know the why, understand that you can still look at the impact, how it really shows up for you. But I don't want you stressing over trying to figure out the why if it's not coming up pretty quickly, because otherwise you're going to be spinning in circles and you say, forget it. I'm just going to continue on, and things continue to not work for you. I also have to tell you this. It's generally better to do this work with someone like myself or, another person who can guide you into a new perspective of your experiences, okay? But it comes down to that one question: where does my need for control come from? When you have that answer, you can go to the next question. It's question number 2. What am I afraid will happen if I let go of control? Maybe you're asking, what am I looking for here? What we're trying to do is to pinpoint the fear. Let me give you a real example that one of the beautiful ladies that I worked with gave to me. And we talked so much about this, and it's going to seem really simple to you, but it wasn't to her. So, again, because she was connected to it, I have to say that. So she was planning this big special event. It was a birthday party, a 50th birthday party. And it was a big, big thing for her. And in the past, a certain person, a friend of theirs who was on the guest list, had ruined events because that person always overdrinks. And so because this was the pattern that her brain said to her, when there's a special event, this person's going to overdrink and there's going to be a problem. She went about trying to control the environment. She talked to her friend a few times about the behavior. She had planned to talk to the bartender to not overserve her. She was going to do everything she possibly could to try to not be in a place that was negative or that she had a lack of safety or no control. And I asked her to question the assumption. What would happen if your friend came and she knew how important it was to you that she didn't drink, that she didn't cause a situation? What would happen? And she said, well, my friend wouldn't ruin the night. And I asked her, is that within your control? And she kind of sat there for a second and she said, I guess not. I can't control what she drinks or what she doesn't. I can't control how she shows up. I can't control that it matters to me that she does something or she doesn't do something. I can't control that she doesn't understand how big the event is. I can't control. And so I went back to the question, what am I afraid will happen if I let go of control? Well, all the things that I don't want to happen. And the next thing I want you to think about is sometimes I don't have control no matter how hard I try, right? That's true for all of us. Once you have the answer to what am I afraid of if I let go, I want you to move to the next question, and that is, if I surrender, what do I gain? Another way to put this is, what is the cost? I asked this lady that was sitting in front of me, if you allowed yourself to surrender, if you allowed yourself to really enjoy the moment despite what anyone else does, that friend or anyone else, what is the cost? Well, I'm going to have a great night. I'm going to enjoy this big party. I'm going to enjoy the fruits of my labor. Okay, great. And what does it cost if you don't? Oh, I'm going to be so upset. The whole night will be impacted. The whole night will be ruined. Okay, what's the cost? That's the impact. That's what you're looking for. Feeling the need to control or be in control is natural. It's something we all inherently want. And yet we have to look at, what is the cost? What will this cost me? How will this impact me? And is that what I want? Once you realize that, you can start looking at, just like she did, what will I gain? Well, increased peace. I'm going to get a better sense of myself. I now know that if I let go of control, I have more control. I'm going to be better prepared for life's unexpected moments. Because if uncertainty causes me to control and I surrender over and over and over again, I become patterned, conditioned, habitual about being less specific about my outcomes. It's so important. We talked about that earlier. I also have the ability to become less attached and more open. I became less attached to the moment that my friend could ruin something for me, and I decided to go with the flow. And I was present. I enjoyed the night. It also enhances your communication with yourself and others. It also enhances the connection with yourself and others. When we're deep in control, we actually push our true self to the side, and we do the same to others. We don't want deep connection because it doesn't feel like that will guard our safety. And what does that do? It guards our love. Even when life feels safer and you're in control of everything, we have to remember that we're really not. And so when we're in this space, remember that we ask ourselves these questions and we begin to reevaluate our expectations. When we reevaluate the expectation, we start change. We surrender. We step outside of that box of fear. We spend more time negotiating with what is instead of what will be. And when we're open to that, we can surrender. You are hardwired to resist this change because it doesn't feel safe. But it's easier to control the inside factors by letting go. And if we have control of the self, we have control of the outside environment. You have to change your relationship with control. Remember to start with the why. Start with the relationship, what works for you. Be open to letting go. Be open to surrendering. Be open to know that control is safety. And yet, if I let go, I also allow myself to know that safety is present. If you carry on through your entire life with a sense of needing control, you will never find peace. You will never find a true sense of self. You will never actually be able to live your life the fullest and best, most beautiful way. There'll always be conflict because you're fighting nature. If you think about this, if life itself, if the nature of life is change, if you fight nature, you're not going to win. Wouldn't it just be better to surrender, to let go, and to stop fighting? To get into a space where you're asking yourself, do I need to control or do I need to be present? I feel I control. What do I really need at this moment? What do I want? Because when you get there, you change your life. When you let go, you basically give yourself a roadmap into getting your life together. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips for bettering your life and are seeking daily inspiration and additional tools and tips, you can follow me on social media at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Clapper, YouTube, and now Threads. You can also follow me on Insight Timer. If you're interested in seeing the show notes, my blog, or my website, head there to getyourlifetogethergirl.com, and you can also share the episode with a family or friend directly from our website. I also invite you to check out my new 15-day affirmation course that'll take you on a journey through your brain chemistry and how to use it to create your greatest desire. It's on Insight Timer, waiting for you right now. Thank you once again for being a valuable part of this community. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.